Transportation creates a connected world. But transportation is also responsible for much of the world's carbon emissions. The sector accounts for almost 30% of greenhouse gas emissions now. And that could grow because global transport activity will more than double by 2050. So moves to decarbonize transportation are now more urgent than ever.
If we don't start now, the challenge becomes all the more daunting and all the more difficult. It's going to be all the more expensive.
If we look at the latest IPCC reports, for example, that the carbon budget to keep the world on the plus 1.5 Celsius warming trajectory is running out if we don't act fast enough.
Asia is the fastest growing region in the world. But that growth has come with a price. Carbon emissions are warming the planet. Now, Asia and the world are on a race to decarbonize, to accelerate a renewable energy transition, to slash emissions from transportation, and to have capital catalyze innovations and action across the globe. The race to get to net zero by 2050 has begun. Heavy transportation. It's long been considered a hard-to-abate sector in decarbonization objectives. While progress continues on some battery-powered developments, the consensus is that getting emissions down on long-haul heavy transportation is a longer way off.
Heavy transportation is one of the big kind of yet-to-be-solved problems of energy transitions. It's not obvious that electrification is going to be the easiest solution in that space because the size and weight of the battery necessary to move very heavy goods around. That's why many countries are looking at alternative solutions and looking at low-carbon fuels that may be able to step in for that task.
Those low-carbon fuels are already being explored in the maritime industry, responsible for almost 3% of the world's carbon emissions, or 940 million tons annually.
This is equivalent to, I think, the emissions of the sixth largest nation, which is Germany. So just to put things into perspective, 3% is not small.
One low-carbon fuel that's gaining attention is hydrogen. Hydrogen is already used to power some cars and even trucks. Now, trials have begun to use hydrogen for shipping. The MF Hydra is the world's first liquid hydrogen-powered vessel. It's a passenger ferry craft designed to carry 300 passengers and 80 cars. It's designed by LMG Marin in Norway, a subsidiary of Singapore's Sembcorp Marine.
There are another half a dozen of projects ongoing in different parts of Europe using hydrogen as fuel. Singapore has also started our own hydrogen fuel project, and this is a project led by Sembcorp Marine together with our partners Shell and Penguin to convert one of its ferry to use hydrogen fuel cell so that we can have a lower carbon emissions in our harbour. And this will potentially lure the rest of the ship operators to join us in our journey in greening the Singapore harbour.
We can't wait anymore because the renewable itself is definitely the goal. At the same time, solutions for new energy has begun. With the current interest as well as the technology provided by the industry, I believe such new energy production cycle will be shortened.
The first hydrogen fuel cell was invented all the way back in 1842. The basic mechanics remain the same in the fuel cells of today. This is how it now works in a car. Highly compressed hydrogen is stored in the vehicle's tank, then in the fuel cell. Hydrogen molecules enter the anode. Hydrogen molecules are split into protons and electrons at the anode. Protons flow through the membrane in the fuel cell and end up in the cathode. The electrons take a different route, leaving the fuel cell through a circuit, powering an electric motor, driving the car. After leaving the circuit, the electrons join the protons in the cathode. Air, which is 21% oxygen, flows through the cathode. It combines with the protons and electrons of hydrogen to produce water, which is the only waste material in the process. The National University of Singapore is establishing a new centre for hydrogen innovations, the first hydrogen research centre in Singapore, with support from investment company Temasek. Professor Liu Bin will head a team of researchers as they work towards overcoming challenges related to the deployment of hydrogen technologies.
So hydrogen is a special molecule. It doesn't contain the carbon atoms, right? And when hydrogen is completely burned out, it releases water. So that's why when we use hydrogen as the clean energy fuel, it doesn't really need to the further CO2 emission. But of course, we have to make sure that the process we use to produce hydrogen is green enough so that during the production process, we don't involve additional CO2 emission.
Hydrogen has to be produced with electricity. And if that electricity is produced using renewable energy, it's called green hydrogen. That's the only type of hydrogen that would decarbonize the maritime industry. But it would take a little more time for green hydrogen to go mainstream.
One of the key issues is how we make sure it's really cost effective so that it's compatible with any fuel sources from, let's say, fossil fuel. At the same time, we also need to make sure the infrastructure for hydrogen supply, it should be everywhere so that our cars and trucks actually can take them right away. So all these things actually takes time, but we do see a very great potential in the near future that when all this infrastructure is built, the cost is really brought down to what every country can afford, then that will be the great moment hydrogen is used in everywhere that's possible.
For global decarbonization of marine offshore and energy industry, we need more than one solution. For nearshore, coastal, the most immediate solution is electrification. As an interim, LNG is the solution, and Sembcorp Marine have a full portfolio of gas solution, LNG solutions to allow owners to immediately adopt them for greening their fleet. Further down the line, ammonia is a potential future fuel that can further decarbonize maritime fuel, replacing LNG for ocean and long-haul shipping.
To make ammonia, or green ammonia to be exact, you need green hydrogen, produced with renewable energy. There's an extra step to make ammonia with hydrogen, but ammonia has several benefits when used as a marine fuel. Ammonia has been used in other industries for hundreds of years. And ammonia is considered one of several promising new fuels for marine transportation. Here are some of its benefits. There is a proven pathway for the production of green ammonia, which is produced by renewable energy. As a liquid fuel, it can be directly used in internal combustion engines. It has a relatively high energy density, saving precious weight and space for cargo. Ammonia is also easier to store and handle compared to hydrogen. Hydrogen needs to be stored at negative 253 degrees Celsius, whereas ammonia can be stored at negative 33 degrees. Professor Lin Lu heads the Global Center for Maritime Decarbonization. The center is working on a pilot to use ammonia as a shipping fuel.
Ammonia has been touted as one of the alternative fuels for shipping. If you look across the supply chain of ammonia and what's going on overall in developing ammonia as a bunkering fuel, well, the first engines being built and will be ready in 2024. The first ship will be ready in 2025.
The center says Singapore could play a strategic role in developing ammonia as a marine fuel.
We think Singapore is a good test bed for this because Singapore is so population dense. It its ports sees more than 1,000 ships a day. So if we can get the safety guidelines to pass the stringent requirements of the ports of Singapore Inc., I think this means that the safety guidelines would be extensible at ports elsewhere.
Decarbonization is also picking up speed onshore. This is Tuas Megaport in Singapore. When fully completed in 2040s, the megaport will be the world's largest fully automated terminal.
PSA's Tuas port will be a smart and green port, capable of handling up to 65 million 20-foot equivalent units annually. Tuas port will be a single consolidated location for Singapore's container activities. This will significantly reduce inter-terminal haulage operations and greenhouse gas emissions.
One way the megaport reduces emissions is through the use of these electric trucks. These automated guided vehicles ply lanes where in the past diesel prime movers would.
The automated guided vehicles, or AGVs in short, reduce carbon emissions by about 50% as compared with diesel prime movers. We are making plans with green energy providers to bring in regionally produced renewable electricity to power our electrified fleet of equipment. This will further lower our carbon emissions in the foreseeable future.
PSA has global operations with terminals and depots across the world, including Singapore's port. It has set ambitious targets for decarbonization. Broadly, to halve emissions from running a port by 2030 from 2019 levels, and to achieve net zero emissions by 2050.
PSA will leverage our role as a global trade enabler and supply chain orchestrator to positively influence our stakeholders towards clean energy and sustainability. Together, we can contribute to the decarbonization of maritime industry and strengthen Singapore's value proposition as a leading global hub port and international maritime center.
Decarbonization is already underway in the skies.
Even though aviation's emissions are today only 2 to 3% of global carbon emissions, that number will grow to over 20% if not sufficient action is taken. And secondly, aviation's total climate impact because of other pollutants like contrails is 3 times higher than that of carbon dioxide alone. The other factor is about the sense of urgency. So it is recognized, if we look at the latest IPCC reports, for example, that the carbon budget to keep the world on the plus 1.5 Celsius warming trajectory is running out.
The quickest way to decarbonize the aviation sector in the near term is through the use of biofuels, in particular, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, or SAF in short. Rates of adoption for SAF are on the rise. Neste will supply its neat SAF to ExxonMobil for a 1-year pilot to power Singapore Airlines and Scoot flights originating from Singapore.
So the neat sustainable aviation fuel that we are providing allows our customers to reduce their life cycle greenhouse gas emissions by up to 80% compared to the use of conventional jet fuel. And when the pilot was announced, it was also estimated that the emission reductions achieved through that pilot amount to around 2,500 tons of carbon dioxide.
As the aviation sector makes ambitious plans to decarbonize, demand for SAF is expected to rise. So Neste is stepping up production worldwide.
The role of Singapore is going to be critical. It will be contributing 1 million tons to our sustainable aviation fuel production capacity, and that will make Singapore the world's largest producer of sustainable aviation fuels. And we believe that this capacity is also perfectly positioned to support the aviation markets in Asia-Pacific region on their emission reduction goals.
Heavy transportation has long been considered a hard-to-abate sector. But there's a growing optimism that new technologies and systems will come to the fore to finally make it possible for these industries to decarbonize. A multi-fuel strategy might set the course for greener shipping in the future, while the growing adoption of sustainable aviation fuel promises cleaner skies ahead.
The message should be that there are existing solutions out there that can allow us to bend the curve. So technologies and solutions that can immediately allow us to shave carbon emissions, maybe 5–10% at a time. We should think about those.
The one thing about the pandemic is that it has shown that we can change our behaviors if we need to. And I think that is something that brings comfort, that we can also adjust to the requirements that the climate change will require from us.
This program is produced in partnership with Temasek's Ecosperity platform.